Mark Carney and the Liberal Party have tried to tell you that they have stopped the carbon tax on you and everything that you purchase and everything that you buy. But really, he's just moving it over to the industry that will then be forced to increase the prices for the things that you buy. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. Here at the Canadian Shield, we already did a video about how the carbon tax that Mark Carney claims he is removing or destroying or taking off of your food was actually just a bunch of theater where he was hoping that he could compete with Donald Trump on the visuals. The difference, of course, is that he concocted the entire thing to duplicate what Donald Trump was doing. And Donald Trump, of course, was just doing it at his desk and the cameras picked it up. So one is concoction and one is just natural flow of things. Obviously, they're going to find the best location for the camera and all the rest of that. However, leaving Mark Carney's obsession with trying to become like Trump aside, leaving Mark Carney's desire to be thought of as the strong man like Trump is, leaving that aside, let's talk about how the Order in Council only rolled the carbon tax back to zero, which could just instantly re-roll it. As long as the legislation is still standing, it is still a law on the books. It is still the law of the land, as Mark Carney likes to put it. Which means, of course, that the industrial carbon tax, which is part and parcel, is very high. Now, Mark Carney claims that he is going to take the carbon tax that he's putting onto Canadians, onto the gas pumps, and onto everything that we buy, and he's going to remove it from the individual and put it back onto or add it to the industrial carbon tax. Now, it doesn't take a math wizard or a business major from John Molson School of Business to understand that as soon as a company has to pay more money, it has to add cost, it has to add price to the cost of its product. There's no way around that. They're not going to operate going broke so that Mark Carney can try to convince the world that we have carbon-free steel, which of course is a ridiculous idea. Mark Carney's understanding of carbon is very limited. He's not a scientist, and he should appreciate that he doesn't know the definitions of carbon. He doesn't appreciate that he keeps calling the carbon a pollutant, even though plants eat it up and they love it. Right? They can't get enough of it. The more that we give plants, the better they behave, the more that they grow. There's all kinds of reasons why Mark Carney trying to label carbon as a pollutant is not only misinformation, but it speaks to a profound lack of understanding of the science. Brookfield Management does a lot of investment in green energy, and of course we as Canadians should be asking ourselves, the more that Canadians have to buy green energy credits, does that actually benefit Brookfield and by extension benefit Mark Carney? Is Mark Carney shutting down the entire economy of Canada so that he can make a few dollars while you and I go hungry? While you and I start to scrape for an existence that most of the country has yet to think about, and those that have just arrived here know what it is full well? Is that the kind of future or even the present that Canadians want for themselves? When asked if in an effort to stop the hemorrhaging of industry down into the United States of America, would Mark Carney be willing to stop the carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax, the entire carbon tax, basically repeal the bill that puts the carbon tax on all of our lives? Mark Carney said no. He is not intended to do that. He is, in fact, doing us all a favor by keeping it on there. And don't you worry, you'll thank him later.
Our plan, and in fact the regime that's in place in Canada, is to have a form of price for the largest on carbon, for the largest emitters, said differently, the largest polluters. Now, what we are doing is changing that system or improving that system so that the price that's paid can be reduced by so-called carbon credits that are allocated. We're adding additional ones. We will be adding additional ones that ensure that the polluters are paying so that Canadians can receive support to reduce their own emissions. So it's a more efficient system. It works better for the large polluters. It works better for Canadians.
Now, I promise you, I understand economics, and I listened to what he just had to say, and I thought, most people are going to be asking themselves, what did he just say? And you would be right to do so, because he didn't say anything beyond that. Yes, we're going, this was just an elaborate, yes, I'm keeping the carbon tax on people, for all of that, air that he spewed out into the world. He said some pretty important things, though, three specific things that I wanted to discuss. First, he said, no, it's part of the regime in Canada. Like it's cultural, like hockey or something, right? No. You are the regime that put it in Canada. And if you're not going to be the one to take it off of Canadians, then somebody has to. And the Canadians don't like it, or you wouldn't have gone through that theater on the day that you were inaugurated, the day that you were handpicked by the liberal insiders. American businessman Mark Carney went ahead and tried to pretend to everybody that he was somehow taking the carbon tax off at the pump. But really, it had to be done through an order in council, and they didn't take it off at all. They only rolled it back to zero. So they could easily roll it back up to the 21% that they wanted to be at just the second as they get their vote from you. Now, the regime is the Liberal Party. They're the ones that are putting that into it. They're the ones that are reaching into our lives and making everything cost more, make everything less. The scarcity in Canada is getting pretty severe, pretty serious. But we'll cover that. Now, right now, I just want to talk about the couple of things that he said. And he went on to tell you all about the carbon credits, which I know many of you are just so much wanting to hear what the guy is saying about carbon credits, which I'm going to tell you right now is not anything that he's trying to convince you it is. It's just another way for them to add money to your life. Google's AI breaks it down as this: a carbon credit represents a reduction or removal of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, allowing companies or individuals to offset their emissions by funding projects that reduce or remove greenhouse gases. Carbon credits are tradable certificates or permits that represent the avoidance of removal of 1 ton of CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. Now, what can they do? They can trade them, they can offset them, or they can invest in projects. So Mark Carney's telling you that he's about to expand this concept. He's about to expand the carbon credit for all of these companies that he's hoping will come to him and say, you know what, we're going to buy a bunch of carbon credits, and he's going to direct them to Bloomfield. Right? They're going to do projects. They already got a whole bunch of green projects on the go. And they're just these companies are now going to backdoor paying Mark Carney. They're going to be basically bribing him, basically paying him off. And this is why, of course, Mark Carney doesn't want anybody to know about his conflicts. This is why everybody is asking him, what about your conflicts of interest? Because everybody knows that Bloomfield is heavily invested in green jobs. This is what Mark Carney's been working on with Bloomfield for years now. And now he's going to tell you that he's going to allow them to buy credits, which is just, here's a bunch of money and look the other way while we put carbon up into the air. So if you're so obsessed with carbon, how can money solve that problem? I don't understand why taking money out of the company's coffers, money that will have to be taken back from the Canadian population, is going to improve their standard and going to allow them to have the money to invest in technology, which will ultimately stop the emissions. How can we ask them to stop the emissions by doing the same thing if we're taking all of their extra money? But Mark Carney seems to be just trying to angle to have people invest in Brookfield and in projects that his company is working on, so that Mark Carney can ultimately get a kick at the end of the year. When the bonuses are handed out, they'll just write a big fat check to Mark Carney. So basically Mark Carney is doing, he's basically living off the hardships of Canadians, because by imposing the carbon tax, by keeping the carbon tax, he's going to raise the cost of living for all of us. He's telling you he's removing the 21% off of you at the pump with this fake signature. But that 21% bare minimum is being added to every company in Canada. Steel, aluminum, gold, diamonds, doesn't matter what it is. Cars, doesn't matter. If they produce anything that puts emissions into the air, they have to pay by the metric ton to the Liberal government, who will then offer them one of these 3 choices. They can trade, they can offset, or they can invest in projects. And of course, they're going to be encouraged to invest in projects, because many of those projects are going to be going to the third part of what Mark Carney said, how it's going to help Canadians make their lives less expensive, or reduce their carbon footprint. And what does he mean by that? You might think to yourself, well, what he wants to do is he's going to take this money from the companies and he's going to give it to these investment firms. And then he's going to take your tax dollars and he's going to tell you that I'm taking this tax dollars and I'm giving it to these companies that are making products that I deem to be acceptable. And by me giving tax dollars to those companies, you will now save 10% at the till. So everything that you buy from these outfits, you will save 10% on. It's only 3 or 4 companies in the whole entire country, because I'm a liberal and I have to have everything monopolized. I have to have everything centralized. I can't allow for anybody to do anything on their own without my express permission. And that's what he said there. He just said that I'm going to keep the carbon tax on there, and I'm going to charge companies money, or they're going to give me money so that I can tell you that if you buy these certain products, he keeps talking about home insulation, for example, if you buy these certain products, well, you're having a less of a footprint on Earth, and I'm going to give you a 10% discount because the taxes that I've collected, the debt that I'm running up for your great-great-grandchildren is going to go to these companies, so that me and 12 of my best friends are all going to laugh and giggle while you suffer, while you get told that a product that you'll never need, or if you do need, you'll need to buy it one time, is somehow going to change your life. And doing so is going to improve the standard of the whole wide world, while billions of tons of CO2 are put up into the air just in the time that I'm talking to you. No different. There's nothing new. Mr. I'm an outsider. I don't see it in any way, shape, or form. He's an insider. And now he's an insider with so many conflicts of interest that we can't trust him with a penny, with a nickel, with a dollar of our tax money. Because he is absolutely angling towards improving his own ends, while you and I scrape around in the dirt for crickets.
So on the one hand, we have our largest trading partner, as we've been discussing, attacking us, putting tariffs on us. On the other hand, we have the opportunity to diversify trade. Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. And you know what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years from now? If I have the pleasure of being in front of you, you'll be asking me the question, if we didn't do this, if we didn't help our companies get more prepared, the Americans are going to start caring about this again. They have elections every 4 years. They cared a great deal about this 3 months ago. Now all of a sudden they don't care about it.
Now I know you're thinking, wow, that sounded like a load if I've ever heard one. And you would be absolutely right, because I heard exactly every word that he said, and let me translate for you. First, he says that if we want to make trading partners in the EU, well, we have to have green products. If we want to make trading partners with the UK, well, we have to have green products. And if you want to make trade with the emerging markets of Asia, where they don't care about carbon taxes at all, well, you're going to have to all of a sudden do green. So this is his justification, right? That he thinks Canadians are somehow going to get ahead of the Americans with 10 times the population that they have over us, and all of the advantages that when it comes to these kinds of things. Somehow he wants you to believe that that by keeping the carbon tax on you, by costing you more money to live your very life, you're doing yourself a favor. And only Mark Carney has the vision to see it, don't you know? Because you can hear that he believes that by 5 years or 10 years from now, you're going to be up here asking me, and then he just lets that drift off. And then he says, the Americans used to care about this right up to about 90 days ago, and they're going to care about it again. I will bet you dollars to donuts they are never going to care about it again, because you're incorrect to say that they cared about it up to 90 days ago. They didn't care about it so much that when the election came, there was a landslide victory for Donald Trump. Not just one metric. Every metric they measured, Donald Trump gained more ground than the Democratic Party. And now the popularity of the Democratic Party is somewhere a little bit lower than the popularity of the Liberal Party. It's like 22%. Because the people don't want to be political pawns. They want to work. They want to be able to afford to have fun. They want to be able to afford to send their children to good schools. They want to be able to afford to have a nice car. They want to be able to afford a vacation. And every time you say the word carbon tax, you take that away from them. Every time you try to impose carbon tax, you take that away from Canadians, which is why Canada is one of the only countries in the world to impose a carbon tax. I suppose you can try to convince yourself that somehow the French are going to buy steel from us all of a sudden, even though they already have dedicated routes where they buy their steel from. I think that you need to appreciate that putting steel on a ship is not as easy as it might sound, especially the North Atlantic, one of the roughest bodies of water on the face of the earth. And all of that steel going over in ships is, of course, putting a carbon footprint. So are you now going to be charging the carbon tax to move it across the country? And let me go back to the idea that he thinks this might work 10 years from now. So it's already been many years. And we kept hearing from the Liberal government that it was just around the corner. It was just on its way. It's the wave of the future. And now it turns out that the future is still at least 10 years off. The Americans are probably going to select J.D. Vance as their next president and the president after that because they want money in their pocket. And the damage that the far left and the Liberal and the Democratic Party has done to the United States is going to be remembered until a new crop of 20-year-olds come to the fore. It's going to be remembered by the people that did all of the voting, and they're not going to forget. They want economic prosperity. They don't want any of the rest of it, not a single thing. This idea that they're all running around, championing the idea that they're going to eat crickets and ride bicycles is a dream held by a few people who meet every week, every year in Switzerland and email one another. Now Mark Carney's telling you that not only is he keeping the carbon tax, not only is he doing it for your best interest, but you're going to have to continue to suffer and to continue to dump your money into his vision, into his dream, into his desires for at least another decade. So don't think in your mind that it's going to turn around and you're all of a sudden going to one day be able to buy a house. Mark Carney's not going to allow you to build a house. That goes against the carbon footprint. He cuts down trees in Brazil, but he's not going to let you cut down a tree because then if you can cut down a tree, the investments that Brookfield has in housing in Canada, in the mortgages in Canada, well, those are going to be, under threat. He's not going to be making as much money that he can hide in one of his tax shelters. Don't forget that every penny that Brookfield makes, he doesn't pay a single penny of tax into Canada, while he's telling you that not only do you have to pay taxes off your check of nearly 50%, but you have to pay the carbon tax the companies are being charged just to manufacture a product. The only thing that we can take away from what Mark Carney has to say is that we are looking at another decade of hardship, and if we are lucky, we are not going to collapse in on ourselves. He's talking about we're going to generate emerging markets and we're going to make trade with the EU and the UK. Why don't you begin by making trade between Nunavut and Nova Scotia? Why don't you begin by making trade from Whitehorse to Newfoundland? Instead of looking around the world, Mr. I'm a globalist and that's what Canada needs. Canada needs somebody who's going to put Canada first. Not worry about their investment portfolio, not worried about how much money they can hide in the Bahamas, not worried about pretending that they're going to run around Europe and look good to their friends, people they probably have a lot of resentment toward. No, we need people that are going to worry about how we can get trade between Ontario and Saskatchewan, how we can get trade between Alberta and New Brunswick, how we can get trade between PEI, and well, PEI is probably the only province that does a lot of trading because they got a lot of potatoes there. But I think I make my point. Heck, I'll even be willing to include Quebec in all of that trading since they seem to have had a change of heart on how they want to separate, because it's important that we start to develop this country as one nation. That's the difference between the Americans and the Canadians, right? The Americans don't have any problem trading from Ohio to Washington, from California to Montana and the rest of it, from Texas to wherever. Canada seems to only want to be able to trade with places that are south of us, and now there's a tariff going on all of those products. Mark Carney's solution is to try and take those products and give them to Europe, where they already have a bad economy, who are already bending over backwards to please Donald Trump, to meet his demands on the tariff. Instead of thinking about what we can do with the products that we have and make our own country stronger, he wants you to wait 10 more years to see if he was right about this. You cannot understand how much this shocks me to the point where I just think the guy is I mean, this is ridiculously dangerous. There is no way in the world that this will ever work. I mean, a rudimentary the only thing that makes any sense to me is that Mark Carney stands to benefit a lot of money from it. Personally, his personal wealth. And you and I, we're doomed. If we allow this horrible economic policy to move forward, we need things to be less expensive in this country, not more expensive. And we certainly don't need, well, I'll show you just exactly one thing that he says that contradicts what we've been talking about. I told everybody on day one, there is no way in the world that Canada can win a trade war with the United States of America. They are just a behemoth beside us. And I used a lot of references like, a 4-year-old trying to fight an MMA fighter who's 28, or I said that we can't even win a trade war against Greenland. And despite everyone, despite all of the liberals' insistence that we were going to somehow take on the Americans dollar for dollar, Mark Carney was asked about that, and here's what his answer was.
There is a limit, given the relative size of our economies, the extent to which we should match U.S. tariffs. There is a limit, full stop. There is a limit to matching these tariffs dollar for dollar, given the fact that our economy is a tenth the size of the United States.
Well, welcome to the country, Mr. Carney. It's about time you understood that there is no way in the world that we can hold our own against an economy that is 10 times our size. And as a result of having an economy that is 10 times our size, there's no way in the world that the EU is going to take our steel over their steel, because the American steel will be less expensive. And because it is 10 times the amount of production, they're going to be able to make more of it. You have led us down this horrible path of a trade war for reasons that are ideologically driven. Somehow you think you're going to get even with Donald Trump. Somehow you think that, Donald Trump says that you'll be a lot easier to work with. And I can believe him, because the Liberal Party, for all of their tough talk, is very weak. They have weak leadership. They have weak fortitude. They don't have the ability to make themselves understand what the Canadian people are going through. So it's not just weak on one front, it's all over the place. And they will capitulate to Donald Trump the second that he decides to give them a phone call. Nowhere in any of this is Mark Carney going to lead us into economic prosperity, and quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. Based on his own words and his own rudimentary understanding of Canada, we are doomed. We are looking at least a 10-year struggle. If we don't break into a recession or a full-on economic collapse, I will be surprised. I truly will be surprised if we follow any of the policies that are currently laid out in lieu of all of the changes that are happening around globally. In spite of Mark Carney's insistence that somehow holding on to the green philosophy is going to return 5 years from now, 4 years from now, when the Americans have another election. It's not just the American economy that is turning against the far left policies. It's not just the American country that's turning against the far left policies. People are moving against the far left in the UK and in France and in Germany, in Sweden, in Norway. Many of these countries have already turned against the policies. Norway has already amped up its oil production. And I think that, leaving all of that aside, that we as Canadians need to appreciate that this is not going to be the solution. This man is not going to be the solution to our problems. How can we be following the same policies that got us here and somehow think that it's going to get us out this time? The very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and somehow thinking it's going to give you a different result. It's not going to give us a different result. It's going to give us the same results. The standard of living will continue to plummet in Canada. It's only a minute until we start to have food shortages. It's only a second until we start to have fuel shortages because we can no longer meet our bills, or because some bank somewhere has decided that our credit rating needs to be leveled down and our interest rates, as a result, the payments that we're making on those have gone up, and we are not producing anything in this country. So we're not even able, we're going to need to try to borrow money against it. And this, I can show you 100 countries in the last 25, 50 years where this exact thing has played out, where they think that everything is going to be hunky-dory fine until the people that lend them the money have come forward and said, it's time for you to give us back, because the policies that you've implemented have not worked out the way that you claimed that they would. It's no different when you borrow money from a bank for a business model, a business plan. You say to them, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing. And when they turn around and they say, well, you're not making any of the money, what are we doing about our loans? This is not a secret. There's nothing about this that a rudimentary understanding of economics wouldn't inform Mark Carney. Of course, Mark Carney, it appears more and more that he either is ideologically driven and that's going to help him make a lot of money, or it's just going to be that he's going to help him make a lot of money while you and I suffer at our expense. We're the ones that are paying the price for it. We're the ones that are not going to have the jobs. We're the ones that are not going to have the affordable places to live. We're not going to have the food that's being manufactured. I mean, don't forget, one of the largest polluters, according to Mark Carney, is agriculture. It's greenhouses and farmers and cattle. They're one of the largest polluters. I know I said steel and aluminum, but let's not forget that they put a lot of carbon, they put so much carbon tax on Canadian food. The stuff we get from China and Mexico comes across the continent or across the world, and it can be purchased cheaper in Canada than Canadian of the same food grown in Canada. And you want me to believe that the carbon tax is a good philosophy because ideologically you hope one day that it's going to show the Americans what green steel looks like? Come on. And on top of all of that, let's not forget that it's not we have, Dofasco, they always talk about. It's an international company. They got steel mills all over the world. It's not like it's a Canadian steel company or an American steel company. They go where the money is because the product is the product. And it's very heavy, and they try to keep moving it in short distances because that way they save money on transportation. Now, I don't want to, keep this going with the understanding of the logistics around the industries that Mark Carney is talking about, but I do absolutely want you to realize that one of the things that he's going to be targeting, one of the things that this gas off the pump, this 21% carbon tax that he's rolled back to zero, one of the first people he's going to hit are the people that make our food. Now, people in Mexico, they don't have that problem. People in China that bring our food, they don't have that problem. People in India that are importing food into Canada, the same food that's grown in Canada, they don't have that problem. Mark Carney is dangerous. He's not going to help this country, and his philosophies and his policies are going to lead us further down the pathway of ruin. I ask you, as you listen to this, is that something that you're willing to agree to? Are you prepared to give up every luxury you ever had and live like they do in the third world so that Mark Carney's vision of a small little market that's 10 times smaller than the American market? I mean, what can we hope to, what impact can we hope to have? If we all went to carbon neutral right now today, how much impact do you really believe that's going to have against the billion people in Asia that are throwing carbon up into the air with reckless abandon, without a single concern about it being filtered, without a single concern about what it does or where it goes or any of that? What footprint can we honestly hope to have against those staggering amounts of numbers? All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.